G'day there, cobbers and cobbettes. It's old mate I Read Reddit back at it again with some more pro-revenge shenanigans. Before we throw a shimp on the Barbie, you gotta do me a solid and capture that subscribe button, just like old mate Steve Owen captured our hearts back in the day. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride, fellas and Sheilas. I hope you love these professional revenginal stories. So the title for this story is How I Made the Worst Employer in the World Lose a Multi-million-dollar Account. To be honest, the I in the title is not me, but a former colleague who does not have a Reddit account. We worked together in the same ad agency. I will give my personal context first, and then write her story exactly as she told me. We worked together in one of the biggest ad agencies in my country. She was a director, and I was a manager in different departments. It was a global group, but it honestly sucked. I quit because I was burnt out. It had a Game of Thrones politics and daily occurrences of both sexual and moral harassment. That place was the worst professional experience and one of the worst personal ones I've ever had. Fudge them. Now for the story. It is a long one. English not our first language. Mobile. I was hired as an account director for a huge ad agency. Let's call it FFC. My account was one of the top 5 accounts in the agency and was worth at least 7 digits. My boss, the account's VP, was one of the worst human beings I have ever met. He was sexist, rude, and liked to play favorites. When I got there, as a young and okay-looking woman, I instantly became one of his favorites. He was married, by the way. One day we left a happy hour together, and he offered me a ride. I lived nearby, so not overthinking it, I accepted. He made a move on me. I politely refused that and left the car. After that, my life became a living hell. He would not include me in important meetings and would complain that I didn't know things that were discussed. My reviews went from 5 stars to 1. He pretended he didn't remember a raise he had promised me. He wouldn't talk with my team and ignore me. The work, which was already hard since I work an 80-hour week, became almost unbearable. I quit. I had a long conversation with the agency HR, which went nowhere, because she was his personal friend. I even escalated it to the president, with whom I had a friendly relationship, and he said I was reading too much into things. One thing I did right though is that I had a great relationship with my client, so they were afraid to fire me. I had helped save the account, which was almost lost when I was hired. So, they played a smart hand. They hired a girl who had worked with my client on his former company, with whom he had a friendly relationship with, to replace me. They then put me aside on a smaller account, which was on the verge of being lost, so they could justify firing me when that happened. But then I got lucky. My original client got promoted and opened a marketing manager position under him. When I applied, he even skipped a few hiring steps. This was October, and I was to start on January. I asked him not to disclose to the agency that he had hired me until I had the chance to tell them myself. The position would not work directly with the ad agency, and I no longer managed their account, so there was no conflict of interest, and he said okay. Honestly, he couldn't care less. I was planning on giving them my 1-month notice, required in my country, in November, so they could have time to find someone else. Guess what? I was fired October 31st. It would have been the worst experience in the world if I cared. The VP asked me into his office to fire me. He said no one would believe me, that I would never find another job in the market, that I had ratted him out to the HR, and that I was incompetent and all the worst things someone could have said. He sent me to the HR to sign some papers and told me to leave the building afterwards. I recorded him. When I went to the HR, the woman in charge sat me down and kept making snark comments about me not appreciating working in one of the biggest ad agencies in the world, that I could have been great. God, it was surreal. Being fired in my country grants people a fair amount of money. I would have received around 5 months' pay per the law. She wanted me to sign papers accepting that. I said no, and played her the record from the VP. She went pale because she knew that that was a lawsuit, and also that the global team would not like it at all. I left that day and said I would contact them through my lawyer. Never said anything about the job lined up. The next week, I, my lawyer, my recording, and a bunch of other documents, emails, text messages, sat down with the agency to negotiate. I ended up with over 15 months' pay, both parts signed as a non-disclosure agreement, which included me saying I had quit. I then took a 2-month vacation, told my new boss I had made a deal while quitting, but that I had not disclosed I was going to work for them. He said he would tell them himself, not to worry. Comes January, and I start at my new job. My boss then tells me, since I was the one with the most experience in the advertising agencies, I would be a consultant to the annual deals for the agencies that all managed all their accounts. This included allowing new agencies to pitch for us. My boss, which didn't deal with the FFC anymore, of course forgot to tell them about me. No feeling in the world was better than entering the agency as a client. It was almost orgasmic, sitting in a meeting to see their pitch and watching the VP's dumbstruck face when he entered the room. I was nothing but nice, made pertinent questions, and smiled all the way through. I ended up telling my boss in confidence what had happened. He authorized me to advise against the agency, saying that if compliance knew about their behavior, they would lose the account anyway. They lost the account. They lost 3 other accounts in the same year. The whole leadership was fired, and the agency closed. The VP can't find a job for his life. And I just got promoted. TLDR, sexually harassed employees gets fired, strikes a deal using recordings, gets hired by one of the agency's clients, and makes them lose the account. So, I was working with a B2B sales company. We sold services to companies basically. And this company had managed to hire the most incompetent, lazy, and jealous sales manager I have ever come across. We were a team of 5 salespeople and a sales manager. All 5 of us salespeople hated our sales manager for various reasons, but we did like her personally. I was the top salesperson on the team. I was sitting at 170% of my yearly objective and was well on my way to President's Club. This is largely because I was the only salesperson on the team with real sales experience, and the sales manager was too incompetent to train a team. So my VP came down for our yearly performance reviews, and I was called in first. It was my VP and Mrs. B, short for jerk, or something else with a B. I was expecting a positive performance review. Right off the bat, Mrs. B hit me with a sting. You know, our location hasn't been performing an objective for a number of years, and we suspect this is because salespeople are misinterpreting their daily work. I'm taken back. Sting, I don't think you're actually doing what you say you're doing in your CRM. This is something that could get you fired. I look at Mrs. B and I said, really? She said, yeah. I hit her back with, I'm shocked you decided to go this route. Mrs. B with a confident smile said, we gotta do what it takes to get this location on objective. I said, alright, let's play a game. Mrs. B, pick a day, any day in the CRM, and let me prove to you that I went to all my appointments and did all my stops as recorded. Well, Sting, I'm not saying you never go in the field. I'm just saying that I think that some days you stay at home and just put in BS notes in the CRM. I said, Mrs. B, pick a day, any day. Pick a day you think I lied about my sales activity. So, Mrs. B picks a day. Now, I'm smiling ear to ear, and I'm fudging heated right now. I notice the VP is smiling at me, and his head is slanted to one side. I suspected he knew Mrs. B was about to get absolutely fudging owned, and he was right. So she gives me the day, and I turn to the VP. G'day there, Mr. VP. Are you aware of how Android phones work? VP responds, enlighten me. I said, by default, Android has location services turned on, and in fact, Google will track where you went and when. Naturally, I carry my phone everywhere. So let's compare what Google says I did that day to what my CRM says. So I pull up my Google location services for that day, and surprise, surprise, it's a match. Mrs. B is obviously very concerned at this point. I said, I'm actually quite enjoying this performance review. Oh, let's pick another day, Mrs. B. Mrs. B fires back, we don't need to do that. I turn to the VP and I say, Mr. VP, would you mind picking a day, any day? He says, sure, what about XYZ? He pulls up my CRM. I pull my location services for that day. Oh, guess what? It's a match. I then get ready to pull out the big guns. Mr. VP, do you remember company XYZ with a contract value excess of $1 million that we lost recently? Ah, yes, Sting, I remember. Apparently our competitor won them over on price. We can't win them all. Mr. VP, here is an email from their VP basically stating that they've decided not to go with us for our failure to provide 3 samples for them to decide on which product worked best for them. Sting, can you forward that to me? Oh my god, sure, not a problem, Mr. VP. So I forward it over, and I say, Mr. VP, while I'm at this, let me forward over several chain emails before this where I clearly asked Mrs. B over there to order those samples. In fact, in those very same email chains, she confirmed that in fact she had ordered the sample. He asked me to forward those emails to him, so I did. Oh my god, now Mr. VP, I had our service department look to see if any orders had been placed for those samples, and guess what? No orders were actually placed. He said, I'm going to look into this. Oh, at this point, Mrs. B is fudging, sweating, mother fudging bullets at this point. My performance review had just turned into a performance review, and crap's not going right for her. Mr. VP, I have one more thing I'd like to bring to your attention. Do you mind if I step outside for a minute so I can show you? He said, sure. I need to have a talk with Mrs. B anyway. Now, I need to mention that several years prior to this, a general manager at another location took advantage of a woman. The company was sued and lost a lot of money because of this. Since this incident, the company put in a very clear-cut policy: no sexual relations between management and people who work for them. It's immediate termination for the manager. Now, another sales consultant in the office was named Joe, was a married man with 2 beautiful kids. And guess what? Mrs. B had the hots for him. She tried to have sex with him multiple times, twice on text. Joe and I had talked about if he should report this transgression. I walked into the sales office and said, Joe, I think it's time we get a new sales manager. You got those texts? He looks at me and goes, is today gonna be the day? I say, today is gonna be the day, my friend. All the sales staff knew what was going on. The mood in the office was lifted. Joe and I began walking back to the conference room when the location manager, who was not a part of the performance review, saw Joe and I. He asked, what's going on? And Joe said, you're gonna need to hire a new sales manager soon. Needless to say, location manager was confused. He said he's coming into the meeting. We said fine. I knocked on the door. Mr. VP said come on in, so I did. There we stood, Joe, myself, and the location manager. Mrs. B knew exactly what was about to happen. We all took our seats, and I asked the VP, Mr. VP, I just want to clarify a company policy. Sure. Is it true that if a manager tried to engage in a sexual relationship with a direct report, that it's immediate termination for that manager? Mr. VP sits up straight, takes a moment, and goes, yes, if something like that came to my attention, my hands would be tied and I would have to fire the manager. I said, well, Joe has something he wants to show ya. Mrs. B got up and walked out of the conference room. She was about to cry, you could tell. Her world, her career, had just completely wrecked, and I don't think she wanted to be around for the end. Joe went on to tell the VP how he's a happily married man with 2 beautiful kids, and Mrs. B kept hitting on him. In fact, she had sent him numerous sexual texts, and on 2 occasions openly invited him to come have sex with her, once in the office and once at his house, even after he made it clear he wasn't going to have sex with her. Mr. VP asked to see the texts, and Joe provided them. The VP asked him to screenshot those and email those over. Joe said that he would. Then the VP said, I'm going to need both of you to go back to the sales office. The location manager and I have some talking to do. We walked back into the sales office. I noticed the sales manager office had looked cleaned out. Apparently Mrs. B was bawling. She was a wreck and crying, and said she was going home. Joe laughed and said, yeah, she won't be coming back. It was about 20 to 25 minutes when the VP came into the sales office and asked me to come into the conference room again. So I did. I sat down and the VP said, well, I would like to inform you that Mrs. B has been terminated effectively immediately. With this being said, after your performance review and looking over your numbers, you are our top sales rep in this location and deserve nothing short of stellar remarks on your review, and you'll be getting that. I said, thank you. I do have one question. He said, sure, anything. How do I apply for the new sales manager job that just opened up? Mr. VP laughed and said, ha ha ha. "You sure do like to strike while the iron is hot, don't you?" I said I do. He said he would let the location manager know, and I'd be able to put in my application. I thanked him and said, "No, thank you. In my 35 years of being in sales and sales managing, that was by far the most interesting performance review I have ever witnessed." I did not end up getting promoted. I ended up quitting shortly after this. Because they decided to not promote me and instead hired a guy with no sales experience to be our sales manager, and this rubbed me the wrong way. Also, our service department sucked and couldn't deliver on what I was selling, and another company offered me more money. God, that ended abruptly. Well guys, I hope you liked that video. This is I Read Reddit, and tell me what you think of the characters that I've played in this below. Tell me any other subreddits you'd like to hear. We got a whole bunch more entitled parents coming, and yeah, I hope you have a good day. I'll see you later.